My name is Mason Parker, 32 years old, and success was always something my family thought I would never achieve. Last Thanksgiving, they made that crystal clear when they forced me to enter through the back door like a servant, while real guests used the front entrance. I ate alone in the kitchen, swallowing my pride with each bitter bite. Then their landlord walked in and changed everything with 5 simple words. "Good to see you, boss." Before I dive into this story, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, hit that like button, and subscribe to follow my journey from family outcast to unexpected victor. Growing up in a middle-class neighborhood on the south side of Chicago wasn't always easy, but it was home. My childhood was relatively normal until I turned 12. That's when my parents decided their 20-year marriage had run its course. The divorce wasn't particularly nasty, just cold, calculated, and quick. My mom, Linda, wasted no time finding her upgrade in the form of Harold Thompson, a real estate investor who drove a Mercedes and wore suits that cost more than our monthly rent. Harold brought with him 2 teenagers from his previous marriage, Jessica, 16, and Derek, 14. I was the awkward addition to this ready-made family, and they never let me forget it. From day one, there was an unspoken hierarchy in the Thompson household. Harold at the top, then Jessica and Derek, then my mom, who seemed desperate to maintain her new status, and me at the bottom, the reminder of a past Harold didn't share. "Mason needs to understand that things work differently in this house," Harold would say whenever I violated some unwritten rule of their household. His children quickly adopted his dismissive tone. We moved into Harold's sprawling suburban home with its manicured lawn and 3-car garage. My belongings from our modest apartment looked shabby in my new room, which, though bigger than my old one, was notably smaller than either Jessica's or Derek's. It was the first of many subtle messages about where I stood. School became my refuge. I was good at math and had a knack for business concepts, even at a young age. My economics teacher, Mr. Ramirez, recognized something in me that my family didn't bother to see. "You have an entrepreneur's mind, Mason," he told me during my junior year of high school. "You see opportunities where others see obstacles." Those words stuck with me when I enrolled at the local community college. Harold had made it clear that Jessica and Derek would get full rides to prestigious universities, but I would have to earn my way through education. I worked part-time jobs to pay for classes while developing small business ideas on the side. By sophomore year, I had started a modest e-commerce venture reselling clearance items from big-box stores. It wasn't glamorous, but it was profitable enough that I made the difficult decision to drop out and focus on growing my business. The family reaction was predictable. Another Parker family dropout. Derek sneered at Thanksgiving dinner that year. "At least delivery drivers are essential workers," Jessica added with a fake smile. My mother said nothing. She just looked down at her plate. A habit she had developed whenever conflict arose between me and my stepfamily. Harold didn't bother with subtlety. "You're making a mistake that will follow you for life, Mason. But you're an adult now. Your failures are your own." I moved out that night into a tiny studio apartment and focused on building my business. Those early years were tough: ramen noodles for dinner, sleeping on a futon, and working 18-hour days. But slowly, things started to turn around. My small e-commerce operation evolved into a logistics company that helped other small businesses optimize their supply chains. Then I expanded into commercial real estate, focusing on purchasing struggling properties, revitalizing them, and either flipping them or managing them as income properties. All the while, contact with my family dwindled to obligatory birthday calls and the occasional holiday visit. Each interaction followed the same pattern: Harold talking about his latest acquisition, Jessica bragging about her husband's law practice, Derek dropping names from his corporate job, and my mother nodding along. If they asked about my work at all, their eyes would glaze over before I could finish explaining what my company actually did. What they didn't know, what I never bothered to tell them, was that my company had become remarkably successful. I had been featured in several business magazines and had even made a regional 30 under 30 list. I kept a low personal profile, preferring to let the work speak for itself rather than boast about my net worth. Besides, I had learned long ago that seeking validation from people who had decided not to value you was a fool's errand. 3 years had passed since my last family Thanksgiving when my mother called in early November. Harold was hosting a big family gathering, and she really thought I should be there. After some hesitation, I agreed. Perhaps time had softened some edges. Perhaps I had something to prove. Or perhaps, despite everything, some part of me still hoped for acceptance from the only family I had left. The drive to Harold's suburban estate took almost an hour from my downtown condo. I had debated which car to take. The Tesla might seem showy, the Range Rover too pretentious, and settled on my modest Audi, comfortable yet understated. In the passenger seat sat a bottle of 30-year-old Scotch for Harold, an expensive cashmere wrap for my mother, and thoughtfully selected gifts for Jessica, Derek, and their spouses. An attempt at olive branches, though I suspected they might be used as kindling instead. The neighborhood had aged well, large Tudor-style homes set back from tree-lined streets. Pristine lawns despite the November chill. Harold's house stood imposing at the end of a cul-de-sac, its stone facade and dramatic entrance designed to impress. The circular driveway already held several vehicles: Derek's BMW, Jessica's husband's Porsche SUV, and various other luxury cars belonging to Harold's brothers and business associates. I parked behind a Mercedes, grabbed the gifts from my trunk, and walked up the cobblestone path to the front door. The house was decorated for Thanksgiving with an elaborate autumn wreath and professionally arranged pumpkin displays. Through the beveled glass panels, I could see people moving about inside, the warm glow of chandeliers illuminating their conversations. I rang the doorbell, shifting the weight of the gift bags in my arms. After a moment, the door opened, and Jessica stood there in a designer dress, glass of wine in hand. Her smile faltered when she saw me. "Oh, Mason! You're here!" She glanced over her shoulder, then lowered her voice. "Could you go around to the back? We have the caterers coming in and out of the front, and there's a whole setup in the foyer for guests." "I am a guest," I said, confusion evident in my voice. She sighed, impatience flashing across her face. "You know what I mean. Family is different. The back door goes straight to the kitchen anyway, and Mom might need help with something." Before I could respond, she had already begun closing the door. "See you inside." I stood there, gift bags hanging from my hands, as the heavy door clicked shut. Through the glass, I watched as Jessica returned to a group of people, laughing at something someone said. Swallowing my pride, I walked back down the path, around the side of the house, past the garden that was now dormant for winter, and to the back service entrance that led to the kitchen. As I approached the back door, I noticed another car pulling into the driveway. A couple emerged, friends of Harold's from his country club, I would later learn, and walked directly to the front door. Jessica answered again, this time with enthusiastic hugs and loud exclamations of, "So glad you could make it! Everyone's in the living room!" The contrast wasn't subtle. I entered through the kitchen door, where my mother was arranging appetizers alongside 2 hired servers. "Mason! You made it!" She gave me a quick hug, her attention clearly divided. "You can put your coat in the mudroom. We're just about to serve the first round of hors d'oeuvres." "I brought gifts," I said, holding up the bags. "Oh, that's sweet. Just put them with the others in the dining room. Harold's brothers brought some nice wines." She turned back to arranging prosciutto-wrapped asparagus on a silver tray. "If you want to help, you could fill the ice bucket for the champagne." I set my gifts on a counter and did as asked, already falling into the familiar role of helpful outsider. Through the kitchen's swinging door, I could hear the lively conversation in the living room, Harold's booming laugh, Derek discussing something about market projections, the tinkling of glasses and background music creating the perfect soundtrack to upper-middle-class contentment. When I finally made my way into the main part of the house, balancing a tray of champagne flutes as instructed by my mother, the scene was exactly as I'd imagined. Harold held court near the fireplace, gesturing with a tumbler of bourbon as he regaled his audience with some anecdote. Jessica and her husband Ryan stood nearby, her hand possessively on his arm as if to showcase him like an accessory. Derek was engaged in what appeared to be a serious conversation with Harold's brother, both men nodding gravely as if discussing matters of national security rather than golf handicaps. "Ah, the drinks have arrived," Harold announced as I entered. Not "Mason has arrived," or even a simple greeting. I was an extension of the service I was providing. I set the tray down on the designated table and attempted to integrate myself into the gathering. As I approached Harold's circle, he gave me a perfunctory clap on the shoulder. "Mason, good to see you made it." He immediately turned back to his story, effectively dismissing me from the conversation. I drifted toward Derek instead, catching the tail end of his conversation. Completely restructured their debt financing. The CEO practically begged us to take over the account. He noticed me hovering nearby and paused. "Mason, how's the internet business?" "It's a logistics and property management company now, actually. We've expanded quite a bit since." "Fascinating," Derek interrupted, clearly not finding it so. "Uncle Philip was just telling me about his new yacht. 45-footer, right, Philip?" And just like that, I was outside the conversation again. This pattern repeated itself throughout the pre-dinner socializing. Jessica's children ran past me without acknowledgement, having been introduced to me years ago as Grandma's son, rather than Uncle Mason. When Jessica's husband Ryan did engage with me, it was to ask if I could grab him another drink since I was heading that way anyway. I wasn't heading that way. I wasn't heading anywhere. I was simply standing alone by the window, watching my family perform their well-rehearsed play without a role written for me. As dinner approached, I noticed people checking place cards at the elaborately set dining table. I found mine at the far end, next to the children's booster seats, despite there being empty chairs at the main section of the table where the adults were gathering. "We just thought you wouldn't want to be bored with all the business talk," my mother explained when she noticed my expression. "Plus, Lily and Lucas really need someone responsible at their table." Jessica's 6- and 8-year-old, who had earlier been instructed by their mother not to get their clothes dirty by hugging me. I took my assigned seat, watching as Harold carved the turkey at the head of the table, distributing the choice pieces to his brothers, then to Derek and Jessica, then to their spouses. By the time the platter reached the children's table, only the less desirable portions remained. It was such a perfect metaphor that I almost laughed. "Mason, would you mind grabbing more ice from the garage freezer?" My mother's voice interrupted my first bite of turkey. I looked up to see her standing beside the dining table, an empty ice bucket in hand. The catering staff was busy serving sides, and apparently ice retrieval fell to me. I set down my fork and nodded, taking the bucket and heading toward the garage. As I passed through the kitchen, I overheard Jessica talking to one of the caterers. "If you need any help, just ask Mason. He's used to this kind of work." The caterer looked confused, but Jessica's meaning was crystal clear to me. The garage was cold, and the freezer was buried behind golf bags and holiday decoration boxes. By the time I returned with the ice, most people had finished their first servings and were deep in conversation. My plate sat untouched, the food now cold. "Finally," Derek muttered as I refilled the ice bucket. "Thought you might have gotten lost." "Just enjoying the garage ambience," I replied with forced lightness. "It's warmer than some areas of the house." The comment went either unnoticed or deliberately ignored as Harold launched into a story about his recent business triumph. Picked up 3 properties in the Westbrook development for 20 cents on the dollar. Previous owner had no idea how to manage cash flow. That's the difference between amateurs and professionals. Derek's wife Megan chimed in, glancing pointedly in my direction. Some people think they can just jump into business without proper credentials. I had 2 advanced business certifications and had guest lectured at the local university's entrepreneurship program. But correcting her seemed pointless. Instead, I focused on cutting my cold turkey into perfectly even pieces. The pattern continued throughout dinner. When Harold asked if anyone wanted to share what they were thankful for, he went around the table starting with his siblings, then Derek and Jessica, then their spouses. Before reaching me, he abruptly decided it was time for dessert. "Mason, would you help your mother clear the plates?" he asked, though it wasn't really a question. As I gathered dishes, Jessica's son Lucas tugged at her sleeve. "Mommy, why does Uncle Mason have to clean up? Is he the helper?" Jessica patted his head. "Mason likes to help, sweetie. It's what he does." Then, in a stage whisper that was meant to be heard, "And he's not really your uncle, remember? He's Grandma's son." Lucas nodded seriously, filing away this family taxonomy for future reference. In the kitchen, my mother worked silently alongside me, rinsing plates before placing them in the dishwasher. When I tried to start a conversation about her garden, neutral territory, I thought, she gave short, distracted answers before saying, "Harold likes the pumpkin pie served warm with cold whipped cream. Could you take care of that while I bring out the coffee?" Back in the dining room, I distributed dessert plates while remaining invisible. When Jessica's husband Ryan dropped his napkin, he actually snapped his fingers at me before pointing to the floor. As if summoning a waiter, I bent down to retrieve it. My graduate school ring, the one thing I had allowed myself as a symbol of educational achievement despite dropping out of undergraduate studies, catching the light. "Is that new?" my mother asked, noticing the ring for the first time though I'd worn it for 3 years. Before I could answer, Derek snorted. "Online degree, I bet. They'll give those to anyone these days. Actually, it's from Mason. The whipped cream is melting," Harold interrupted. "Perhaps you could bring out the fresh bowl from the refrigerator." As I headed back to the kitchen yet again, I heard Jessica say, "No need to put on airs for Mason. He understands his place." The words stung more than they should have. After all these years, why did I still crave their approval? Why did their dismissal still have the power to wound? In the kitchen, I took a moment to check my phone. 3 missed calls from Jack, my business partner, and a text that read, "Call ASAP. Richardson contract signed. Full terms accepted." I smiled despite myself. The Richardson deal represented our largest contract to date, a complete logistics overhaul for a regional retail chain that would increase our annual revenue by 30%. I had been negotiating it for months, and now it had come through on Thanksgiving Day. I thought about sharing the news with my family, watching their expressions as they realized that the helper had just closed a multi-million-dollar deal. But what would be the point? Their narratives about me were firmly established. My success or failure was irrelevant to the role they had assigned me. As I returned with the fresh whipped cream, I noticed Ryan commenting on my car visible through the dining room window. "Nice of the company to give Mason a decent car," he said to Derek. "Must be good for morale among the delivery guys." Derek laughed. "Probably least. All show, no substance. That's always been Mason's approach." I set down the whipped cream bowl without comment. Their perception of me as a failure seemed so important to their own sense of success that correcting them felt almost cruel. When dessert was finished, the men migrated to the living room to watch football while the women gathered in the sitting room to discuss holiday shopping plans. No one explicitly told me where to go, which left me in limbo. I attempted to join the men, taking a seat on the edge of a sofa, but the conversation immediately shifted to private school options for Derek's newborn son. "The waiting list for Westbrook Academy is already 2 years long," Harold advised. "Better get on it now if you want any chance." "Already done," Derek said proudly. Called them the day after the pregnancy test came back positive. That's thinking ahead. Harold's brother Philip approved. Education is everything. Can't succeed without the right foundations. All eyes briefly flickered to me, the dropout, the failure, the cautionary tale, before the conversation continued. I excused myself, though no one acknowledged my departure, and drifted toward the sitting room instead. There, Jessica was showing off photos of their recent trip to the Maldives. The overwater bungalows are absolutely worth the extra $5,000 a night. She was explaining to my mother and the other women. The experience is simply unparalleled. I hovered at the edge of their circle until Jessica looked up with mild annoyance. Mason. I think Harold needs help refilling drinks in the other room. He didn't. But the message was clear. I didn't belong in either group. With nowhere else to go, I retreated to the kitchen. The catering staff had departed after setting up the dessert service, leaving the space empty and quiet compared to the lively conversations elsewhere in the house. I leaned against the counter, staring out the window at the darkened backyard. My phone buzzed again. Jack was calling for the 4th time. I should have been celebrating our biggest contract win with him, not standing alone in my stepfather's kitchen being treated like an unwelcome servant. Mason! Finally! Jack's excited voice filled my ear when I answered. Did you get my texts? Richardson signed. Full asking price, no concessions on the implementation timeline, and they want to discuss expanding to their East Coast operations next quarter. That's fantastic, I said, genuine happiness breaking through my gloomy mood. Great work, Jack. Great work? This was all you, man. Your presentation last week sealed it. Richardson specifically mentioned your infrastructure analysis as the deciding factor. We're talking 8 figures over 3 years, Mason. 8 figures. I couldn't help but smile, though there was no one to see it. That's going to make for a very Merry Christmas bonus season for the team. Damn right it is. So what are you doing right now? Breaking the news to your family? Bet they're finally impressed, huh? I glanced toward the living room where I could hear Harold loudly criticizing a referee's call. Actually, I haven't mentioned it. What? Why not? This is huge. Mason. This puts us in a whole different league. It's complicated, Jack. Family stuff usually is. There was a pause on the other end. Jack knew some of my history, but not all of it. Well, their loss, man. The team's having an impromptu celebration at Murphy's pub. You should bail and come join us. The invitation was tempting, to be surrounded by people who actually valued my presence, who understood what this contract meant. People who saw me as a leader rather than an inconvenience. I'll try to stop by later. I promise. Though we both knew it was unlikely given the hour-long drive back to the city. After hanging up, I found myself a plate and served myself a proper portion of the remaining Thanksgiving dishes. The food had gone cold, but I was hungry enough not to care. I sat at the kitchen island, eating alone while the sounds of football and laughter drifted in from other rooms. The irony wasn't lost on me. Outside these walls, I was Mason Parker, CEO of a rapidly growing logistics and property management firm. Someone whose business insights were valuable enough to secure multi-million-dollar contracts. But here, I was just Mason, Linda's son from her first marriage. The family disappointment who couldn't even be trusted to join the proper Thanksgiving conversations. I considered leaving. Just walking out the back door, driving away. And never subjecting myself to this treatment again. What was I trying to prove by staying? That I was mature enough to endure their disdain? That some part of me still hoped for their approval? As I debated with myself, Harold's elderly Aunt Vivian shuffled into the kitchen, her hand pressed against her lower back. These dining room chairs are murder on my spine. She complained to no one in particular before noticing me. Oh, Mason, isn't it? I stood, offering her my seat at the island. Yes, ma'am. Can I get you some water? Water? Goodness, no. I need something stronger if I'm going to make it through another hour of Harold bragging about his golf handicap. Her candor surprised a laugh out of me. There's a bottle of brandy in that cupboard above the refrigerator. Harold thinks he's hidden it from me, but I've known where it is since last Christmas. I retrieved the bottle and a clean glass, pouring her a modest amount. A little more, dear. My tolerance isn't what it once was, but it's still nothing to sneeze at. As she sipped her brandy, she studied me over the rim of her glass. You're not Linda's first husband's boy, are you? Yes, I am. Thought so. You have his chin. Strong chin, good for business. He was a decent man, your father. Not flashy like Harold, but solid. I hadn't expected this conversation turn. My father had rarely come up in family gatherings after the divorce. You knew him well? Well enough. He came to family functions for a few years before the marriage fell apart. Always seemed a bit out of place, like he was speaking a different language than the rest of them. She gestured vaguely toward the living room. Rather like you, I suppose? There was something comforting about her assessment. Perhaps my outsider status wasn't entirely of my own making. Your grandfather was the same way, she continued, surprising me further. Linda's father, I mean. Practical man who built a good business from nothing but hard work and common sense. Harold and his crowd never understood that kind of success. Too quiet for them. Not enough showing off. I had only vague memories of my grandfather, a tall man with callous hands who always carried peppermint candies in his pockets. He had died when I was 9. What kind of business did he have? I asked, realizing I had never known. Started with one delivery truck after the war. Built it into a regional moving company. Nothing glamorous. But it put food on the table and sent your mother to college. She finished her brandy and held out the glass for a refill. He would have understood what you're doing, I think. Before I could ask more questions about this family history I'd never been told, Jessica burst into the kitchen. There you are, Aunt Vivian. Everyone's wondering where you went. Her gaze landed on me with a flash of annoyance. Mason, we need more ice in the living room, and the dessert plates should be cleared by now. Aunt Vivian raised an eyebrow. The boy was keeping me company, Jessica. Surely your husband can manage to put ice in his own drink for once. Jessica's smile tightened. Ryan's discussing his new partnership with Daddy. They shouldn't be interrupted. She turned to me. The dishwasher needs to be loaded properly if everything's going to fit. As I began gathering plates, Aunt Vivian patted my arm sympathetically before being led back to the sitting room. Even this small connection with a family member who saw me as a person rather than a convenience had been severed. I loaded the dishwasher according to Jessica's exacting specifications, swept crumbs from the dining room floor, and replenished the ice bucket. All the while, my phone occasionally buzzed with updates from Jack about the team's celebration. Photos of smiling colleagues raising glasses to our shared success. A video of our office manager making a toast to Mason's brilliant leadership. The contrast between my two worlds had never been starker. In one, I was valued, respected, and celebrated. In the other, I wasn't even worthy of sitting at the adult table. As I wiped down the kitchen counters, I realized something important. I didn't need these people's validation. I had built something meaningful without their support, or even their knowledge. Their opinion of me reflected their limitations, not mine. With this new perspective, I decided to stay. Not because I still craved their approval, but because I was curious to see how long they could maintain their illusion of superiority. It had become almost anthropologically interesting, this family dynamic preserved in amber, unchanged despite years of personal growth and external success. I was still drying the last of the serving platters when the doorbell rang. The chimes echoed through the house, momentarily cutting through the football commentary and conversation. I heard Harold call out from the living room. Jessica, can you get that? Probably those neighbors wanting to borrow something again. Jessica's annoyed sigh carried from the sitting room. I'm in the middle of showing my pictures from the Maldives. In the ensuing silence, it became clear that no one was moving to answer the door. The bell rang again, more insistently this time. "Mason's in the kitchen! He can get it!" Derek shouted, solving the family's dilemma. Of course. The back door servant should naturally attend to the front door interruptions as well. I set down my dish towel and walked through the dining room toward the foyer, catching disapproving glances from Harold's brothers as I passed the living room. Apparently, I was disturbing their game viewing by fulfilling their request. The front door felt almost foreign to me after my banishment to the service entrance earlier. I opened it to find an older gentleman standing on the porch, perhaps in his mid-60s, with silver hair and a well-tailored camel hair coat. He carried a leather portfolio and had the air of someone accustomed to being taken seriously. "Good evening," he said, his breath visible in the cold November air. "I apologize for interrupting your Thanksgiving, but I've been trying to reach Mr. Thompson for several days without success. I'm Thomas Whitfield." The name meant nothing to me. "I'm afraid everyone's watching the game. Can I take a message?" He hesitated, glancing at the portfolio in his hands. "It's rather important business regarding the property. I'm the landlord." That didn't make sense. Harold had always spoken of this house as if he owned it. My property, my investment, my estate. I had never heard any mention of a landlord. "You must be mistaken," I said. "This is the Thompson residence." "Yes, the Thompsons are my tenants." He studied me more carefully. "You're not one of Harold's sons, are you?" "No, I'm his stepson. Mason Parker." The change in his expression was immediate and dramatic. His eyes widened, and he actually took a half step back. "Mason Parker? Of Parker Logistics and Property Management." Now it was my turn to be surprised. "Yes, that's me." "Good Lord." He extended his hand. "It's an honor to meet you, sir. I've followed your company's growth for the past few years. Your acquisition of the Westbrook Commercial Center was brilliant, completely revitalized that whole district." I shook his hand, bemused by this turn of events. "Thank you, Mr. Whitfield. Please call me Thomas." He lowered his voice. "I must say, this is rather awkward. I had no idea you were connected to the Thompsons." "Why would that be awkward?" He glanced past me into the house. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately." Before I could respond, Harold appeared in the foyer behind me, clearly annoyed by the length of time I was taking at the door. "Who is it, Mason?" "We're missing the—" He stopped abruptly when he saw Thomas. "Tom, what are you doing here?" "It's Thanksgiving." "I'm well aware, Harold," Thomas replied coolly. "I wouldn't be here if you'd returned any of my calls this past week." Harold forced a laugh, moving to position himself between me and Thomas. "Business hours are for business, Tom. Surely whatever this is can wait until Monday. 3 months of overdue rent payments can't wait much longer, I'm afraid." The statement hung in the air like a physical presence. Harold's face flushed red, his eyes darting nervously to me and back to Thomas. "There must be some misunderstanding," Harold said, his voice tight. "Let's discuss this in my office." "Actually," Thomas said, "I think I'd prefer to speak with your stepson." Harold's confusion was evident. "Mason? Why would you need to talk to him?" Thomas looked directly at me, a smile spreading across his face. "Because unless I'm very much mistaken, Mr. Parker here is my boss." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the football games seemed to have gone quiet. Though that was probably coincidental. "What are you talking about?" Harold demanded. "Parker Logistics and Property Management acquired Whitfield Investment Group 3 months ago," Thomas explained. "I now manage properties for Mr. Parker's company." He turned to me with a nod that was almost deferential. "Good to see you, boss." The pieces clicked into place. My company had indeed purchased a mid-sized property management firm that owned residential and commercial real estate throughout the Chicago suburbs. I hadn't been involved in the day-to-day integration of their portfolio, and hadn't reviewed every property. But apparently, through a twist of corporate fate, my stepfather's house, the very house I had been relegated to entering through the back door, was now ultimately owned by my company. Harold's face had gone from red to ashen. "This is some kind of joke." "I assure you it's not," Thomas replied. "And while I wouldn't normally discuss tenant issues with the CEO directly, since your family—" He trailed off, clearly enjoying Harold's discomfort. "The fact remains that you're 3 months behind on rent, and you've ignored all standard communications about the matter." The foyer was no longer empty. Derek had appeared in the living room doorway, and Jessica hovered near the dining room entrance. My mother stood behind them, her expression a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. "What's going on?" Derek demanded. Thomas turned to him. "Ah, you must be Derek Thompson. I believe there are also some issues with the commercial property your law firm leases in the Westbrook Center? Another Parker Logistics acquisition, if I'm not mistaken." Derek's jaw actually dropped. He looked from Thomas to me and back again. "That's not possible." But it was. The Westbrook Commercial Center had been one of our most significant recent acquisitions, a distressed property we had purchased at a substantial discount before beginning renovations. Derek's law firm was indeed a tenant there, though I hadn't made the connection since he worked for a large firm with multiple partners whose names took precedence. "Mason," my mother said quietly, "what is this man talking about?" I found myself in the unique position of having all the power in a room where I had previously had none. It was surreal and, I had to admit, somewhat satisfying. "It appears," I said carefully, "that my company owns the property management firm that serves as Harold's landlord. And Derek's, apparently." "Your company?" Jessica scoffed, though with less conviction than usual. "What company?" Thomas raised an eyebrow at her. "Parker Logistics and Property Management. One of the fastest-growing firms in the Midwest. Your stepbrother is quite well known in business circles, young lady. The family tableau before me would have been comical if it weren't so tragic. Harold looked like he might be ill." Derek was frantically checking something on his phone, presumably confirming what he was hearing. Jessica stood frozen, her perpetual look of superiority replaced by uncertainty. And my mother, her expression was the hardest to read. Shock, certainly. Confusion. But also something else. Pride? Shame? Perhaps both. "I think," Thomas said into the silence, "that we should discuss those overdue payments now, Mr. Thompson. Unless you'd prefer I take this up directly with Mr. Parker?" Harold's home office had always been off-limits to me. Even as a teenager, I had never been invited into this inner sanctum where real business took place. Now I sat in one of the leather guest chairs while Thomas Whitfield occupied the other. Harold paced behind his desk, occasionally running his hand through his thinning hair. "This is absurd," he muttered for the third time. "Completely absurd." Thomas had placed his portfolio on the desk, open to a statement of account showing 3 months of unpaid rent totaling just over $30,000. "The terms are quite clear, Mr. Thompson. Payment was due on the 1st of each month. There have been some temporary cash flow issues," Harold said stiffly. "Nothing serious. Just a timing problem with some investments." "You've said the same thing for 3 months," Thomas replied. "The management company has been more than patient." I remained silent, observing this exchange with detached interest. The office told its own story, framed photos of Harold with local celebrities, expensive art that showed no personal taste, just high price tags, and a bookshelf filled with business volumes whose uncracked spines suggested they were more for display than study. A knock at the door interrupted the tense conversation. Derek entered without waiting for a response, his face flushed with what might have been anger or embarrassment. "Is it true?" he demanded, looking at me. "Your company owns the Westbrook Center?" I nodded. "Since August. And you never thought to mention this? My firm has been fighting with the new management over lease terms for months. I didn't know your firm was a tenant there. I replied truthfully. I don't personally review every lease in our portfolio. Convenient. He snapped. Actually, it's just business. Thomas interjected. And speaking of business, we need to resolve the matter at hand. Mr. Thompson, how do you propose to address these overdue payments? Harold sank into his desk chair. I'll have the money by next week. There's a deal closing that will free up the necessary capital. Thomas glanced at me. That's your decision, Mr. Parker. Standard procedure would be to issue a final notice at this point. All eyes turned to me. In that moment, I held power I had never sought over people who had consistently diminished me. The irony was almost too perfect. Before I could respond, there was another knock. Jessica appeared in the doorway, her husband Ryan hovering behind her. What's going on? Why is everyone in here whispering? Her gaze landed on the portfolio. What are those papers? Nothing that concerns you, Harold said sharply. Actually, Thomas corrected, it might. The lease agreement includes this property only. The vacation home in Lake Geneva is under a separate entity that was also acquired in our portfolio review. Jessica's eyes widened. The lake house too? But we're supposed to use it for Christmas. The family home in Lake Geneva had been Harold's pride and joy, a luxury lakefront property he had often used to impress business associates. I had visited it exactly once, for a weekend when my mother had insisted, and had been made to sleep in the boathouse rather than one of the 5 available guest rooms. The situation was becoming clearer. Harold's financial empire was apparently built on rental properties rather than ownership. His displays of wealth, the vacations, the cars, the country club memberships, had created a veneer of success that was now cracking under financial strain. I think, I said finally, that we should all move this conversation to the living room. Mother should be part of this discussion too. Harold looked like he might object, but then nodded stiffly. We relocated to the living room where my mother sat perched on the edge of the sofa, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Harold's brothers had tactfully retreated to the den, taking the football game with them. Will someone please explain what's happening? My mother asked, her voice small. I looked to Harold. I think that's your responsibility. He cleared his throat, straightening his shoulders in an attempt to reclaim some dignity. There have been some business setbacks, Linda. Temporary cash flow issues that have resulted in delayed payments on certain obligations. He means he hasn't paid rent in 3 months. Derek clarified bluntly. On this house, or apparently the lake house. And Mason's company now owns both properties. My mother's confused gaze settled on me. Your company? Mason. What is he talking about? I felt a pang of guilt. Not for my success, but for how little she knew about my life. I run a logistics and property management firm, Mom. We've grown significantly over the past few years. One of our recent acquisitions was apparently the company that manages Harold's properties. Properties he doesn't own. Jessica added bitterly. All this time, we've been living in rental houses? Harold's face flushed. There are tax advantages to certain leasing arrangements that ownership doesn't provide. It's sophisticated financial planning that you wouldn't understand. I understand not paying your bills, Ryan muttered, earning a sharp look from Jessica. What about the cars? The club memberships? My wedding? Jessica's voice rose with each question. Was that all smoke and mirrors too? Harold didn't answer, which was answer enough. The Richardson deal. My mother said suddenly, looking at me. That phone call you took earlier. That was business, wasn't it? Your business. I nodded. We closed a major contract today. It's been in negotiation for months. And you never told us, she said, a note of accusation in her voice. You never asked? I replied simply. Not once in all these years did anyone at this table ever really ask about my work. You decided what I was the day I dropped out of college. and nothing I could have said would have changed that perception. The silence that followed was heavy with recognition. They knew it was true. Derek was the first to recover, his business instincts apparently overriding his shock. So what happens now? You're technically Harold's landlord. And mine too, I guess. Technically, the management company is the landlord. I don't involve myself in day-to-day property decisions. But you could, Jessica said, understanding dawning on her face. You could evict us. The thought had occurred to me. I couldn't deny it. There would be a certain poetic justice in forcing Harold out of the home he had used to exclude me. But that wasn't who I wanted to be. I have no intention of evicting anyone, I said. Mr. Whitfield will work with Harold to create a payment plan for the arrears. As long as future payments are made on time, there's no reason to change the current arrangements. Relief visibly washed over my mother's face. Harold nodded stiffly, his pride clearly wounded but his practical side recognizing the lifeline I was offering. And the lake house? Jessica asked cautiously. The same applies. But I think we should be clear about something. I looked around at each of them. This isn't me doing you a favor. This is business. The management company will enforce the terms of the lease going forward, regardless of our personal relationships. Thomas nodded in agreement. Standard procedure for all tenants. My mother stood suddenly, moving to sit beside me on the couch. All this time, she said quietly, we thought. She trailed off, unable to complete the thought. You thought I was a failure. I finished for her. I know. Why didn't you tell us? It was the question I had been waiting for, though I hadn't expected it from her. Would it have mattered? Would Harold have treated me differently if he knew I was successful? Would Derek and Jessica have suddenly respected me if they knew I had money? No one answered. They didn't need to. I stopped looking for your approval a long time ago, I continued. I had to. It was the only way I could build something for myself. I should have supported you more, my mother said, tears welling in her eyes. After your father left, I was so afraid of ending up alone again. I let that fear. I let it change me. It was the most honest thing she had said to me in years. Perhaps the most honest thing she had said to herself. Harold cleared his throat. I think we should discuss this privately, Linda. No, she said firmly, surprising all of us. No more secrets. No more pretending. She turned to me. I want to know about your life, Mason. Your real life. Not just what we assumed it was. It was a small opening, but it was something. A crack in the facade that had separated us for so long. Thomas tactfully suggested that he and Harold continue their discussion about the payment plan in the office, giving the rest of us some privacy. As they left, Derek and Jessica exchanged glances, clearly unsure of their role in this new family dynamic. I should check on the kids, Jessica murmured, making her escape. Derek lingered, an uncharacteristic uncertainty in his posture. The Westbrook lease renewal, he said finally. Is there any chance we could discuss it sometime? The firm's senior partners are concerned about the rate increase. Email my office. I replied, not unkindly. We can set up a meeting. He nodded, accepting the boundary. For what it's worth. He added, that logistics optimization model you mentioned years ago for retail distribution? The one I said would never work? I heard Nordstrom implemented something similar last year. Apparently it's revolutionizing their inventory management. It was as close to an apology as Derek was likely to get. I acknowledged it with a nod, and he retreated, leaving me alone with my mother. Tell me everything, she said, taking my hand. Start from the beginning. And so I did. The weeks following that Thanksgiving revelation brought changes I never expected. Thomas Whitfield worked with Harold to create a realistic payment plan for the overdue rent, including penalties that my stepfather reluctantly accepted. Business was business. After all, a lesson Harold had taught me himself, though probably not in the way he had intended. I had a private dinner with my mother at a quiet restaurant downtown. For the first time in years, she asked questions about my life and actually listened to the answers. She told me about her own struggles, how she had surrendered her identity to maintain her second marriage, how she had justified Harold's treatment of me by telling herself it was preparing me for a harsh world. "I was wrong," she admitted, her eyes glistening. "And I missed so much of your life because of it." We couldn't repair years of distance in a single dinner, but it was a start. She asked if she could tour my company offices, meet my team, see the business I had built. I agreed, though with the clear understanding that Harold wasn't invited. Some boundaries needed to remain. Derek reached out to schedule that meeting about his firm's lease. When we met, he was all business, professional, prepared, respectful. There was no mention of our family connection during the negotiation, which ended with terms that were fair to both sides. As he was leaving, however, he paused. "You built something impressive, Mason. I should have seen it sooner." I nodded, accepting the acknowledgement for what it was. Different paths, different measures of success. Jessica took longer to come around. Her identity had been so wrapped up in the family mythology Harold had created that my success and his struggles threatened her entire worldview. But reality has a way of asserting itself. When her country club friends began asking about her successful brother in logistics, after a profile of me appeared in Chicago business, her attitude softened somewhat. As for Harold himself, our relationship remained distant but evolved into something resembling mutual respect. He never apologized for the past. I hadn't expected him to, but he stopped dismissing my business acumen. Occasionally, he even asked for advice, though I suspected it was more to prove to my mother that he was trying than from any genuine interest in my perspective. The most significant change, however, was within myself. The Thanksgiving revelation had freed me from seeking validation I was never going to receive. There was a certain peace in that realization, not because I had proven my worth to my family, but because I had finally, truly accepted that I didn't need to. The Richardson contract was indeed a game-changer for my company. We expanded our operations, hired additional staff, and moved into larger offices overlooking the Chicago River. Jack, ever my loyal partner, couldn't resist sending Harold a company press release when we were named to a national list of fastest-growing mid-sized businesses. "Petty?" he asked when I discovered what he'd done. "Maybe. But satisfying?" "Absolutely." I couldn't disagree. For Christmas, I declined the invitation to the lake house. Instead, I hosted a holiday dinner for my employees who didn't have family in town. We rented a private room at an upscale restaurant, exchanged gifts, and celebrated a year of shared achievements. Looking around at these people who had believed in my vision, who had worked alongside me to build something meaningful, I realized that family isn't always defined by blood or marriage certificates. Sometimes family is forged through shared purpose, mutual respect, and genuine connection. I had found mine in the most unexpected place, not in the imposing suburban house I had once desperately wanted to belong in, but in the company I had built when that house had closed its doors to me. In January, I established a scholarship fund in my grandfather's name. The Everett Parker Entrepreneurship Scholarship would provide funding for promising students who, like me, might not follow traditional educational paths but had the drive and vision to create successful businesses. My mother cried when I told her, sharing stories about her father that I had never heard before, how he had started with just one truck and a willingness to work harder than everyone else, how he had valued character over credentials. "He would have been so proud of you," she said. "I should have been proud all along." As winter gave way to spring, I bought my first house, a comfortable but not ostentatious home near the lake with plenty of room for the future I now allowed myself to imagine. I hired decorators but made sure my personal touches were evident throughout. No status symbols, just spaces that felt like me. When my mother visited for the first time, she paused in the entryway. taking it all in. It's lovely, Mason. It feels like a home, not just a house. That's the idea, I replied, leading her into the living room where photographs of my business milestones shared space with the few family photos I had kept, one of my grandfather, one of my father, and a recently added one of my mother and me at my company holiday party. I've been thinking, she said as we settled on the couch, about moving out of Harold's house. Finding my own place. Something smaller, but mine. It was a significant step, an assertion of independence I hadn't expected. Are things that bad between you? She shook her head. Not bad exactly. Just clear. Finally. I lost myself in that marriage, Mason. I don't blame Harold entirely. I made my choices. But I think it's time I made different ones. I promised to help however I could. Not because I wanted to insert myself into her marriage, but because supporting the people you care about is what family is supposed to do, a lesson I had learned from my colleagues rather than my relatives. That spring also brought an unexpected email from Aunt Vivian, Harold's straight-talking elderly aunt who had shared brandy with me in the kitchen. She was selling her condo and wanted advice on real estate matters. From someone who actually knows what they're talking about, unlike my nephew. We met for lunch. And her unvarnished perspective on family dynamics was both hilarious and insightful. Always knew you'd make something of yourself, she declared over dessert. You've got your grandfather's eyes, see everything, say only what needs saying. It was the kind of family connection I had craved for years, one based on genuine recognition rather than obligation. As Thanksgiving approached again, I faced the annual question, would I attend the family gathering? Harold and my mother were still together, though she had indeed found her own apartment and divided her time between the two residences. Derek and Jessica had adjusted to the new family dynamic, though old habits occasionally surfaced in the form of condescending comments or backhanded compliments. In the end, I decided on a compromise. I would make an appearance at the family dinner, no longer through the back door, but would host my own Thanksgiving lunch for friends and colleagues earlier in the day. The best of both worlds. Or at least a balanced approach to the complicated reality of family relationships. Life isn't a fairy tale where validation arrives in dramatic moments of revelation. My family didn't suddenly transform into the supportive unit I had once longed for. Harold didn't become a doting stepfather. Jessica and Derek didn't become my biggest cheerleaders. But small changes accumulated over time, creating space for a different kind of relationship, one based on who we actually were rather than who we had pretended to be. The greatest lesson I learned from that Thanksgiving wasn't about revenge or vindication. It was about the freedom that comes from building your own definition of success and surrounding yourself with people who see your value without needing it explained or proven. So if you're sitting alone in someone's kitchen this holiday season, feeling invisible or undervalued, know this: your worth isn't determined by those who fail to see it. The most powerful response to being treated as insignificant isn't to prove your importance. It's to recognize it for yourself and build a life that reflects that truth. I'd love to hear your stories of unexpected turning points in family relationships. Has there been a moment when everything changed for you? Leave a comment below. Like this video if it resonated with you, and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in difficult situations. Thank you for listening. And remember, sometimes the back door leads to the most unexpected opportunities. Wishing you all a holiday season filled with genuine connections and the courage to walk through whatever doors feel right to you.